Move one more inch, and I promise you, old man, this gets a whole lot worse. The officer's hand was already wrapped around Earl Carter's arm, fingers digging into the thin, loose skin above his elbow like he was gripping something he owned. Earl winced. His knees buckled slightly. 73 years old, standing in the dirt of his own garden, and this man was twisting his arm behind his back like he was some kind of criminal. "You're hurting him." Ruth Carter screamed from the porch steps, her small frame shaking so hard her voice came out in pieces. "He lives here. This is our home." Officer Derek Moss didn't even look at her. And down the street, behind curtains and from cracked doorways, neighbors watched. Phones raised. Nobody moving. Nobody speaking. Just watching. Nobody knew that inside that house, someone was about to walk out and change everything. But let's go back, because this story didn't start with violence. It started with tomatoes. Before commenting, drop your location below. Tell us where in the world you're watching from. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do it right now. We are pushing hard to reach 1,000 subscribers, and every single one matters. Hit that button, it's free, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. The morning had been so peaceful it almost hurt to look at. Soft gold sunlight fell across a quiet street somewhere in middle America, the kind of neighborhood where sprinklers hiss on weekend mornings and birds argued in the oak trees and nobody locked their doors until after dark. Earl Carter knelt in the front garden he had been tending for 38 years, pressing a wooden stake into the soil beside a tomato plant that had grown taller than his knee. "Earl, you're back," Ruth said, kneeling beside him with her gardening gloves already dirty at the fingertips. 4 years of marriage, and she still said it the exact same way. Not a warning, a love note in disguise. "My back is fine," Earl said. "My spirit is what needs tending." Ruth laughed, the easy, full laugh of a woman who had heard that line 100 times and somehow still found it funny. They didn't notice Sandra Holt watching from across the street. Sandra had been watching for weeks. Not because she was afraid of the Carters. She had known Earl and Ruth for 7 years. She knew Ruth made sweet potato pie every Thanksgiving, and that Earl waved at every passing car whether he knew the driver or not. She knew exactly who they were. What she also knew was that a development company called Meridian Group had been quietly buying up homes along their street for the past year and a half. And Sandra was a minority stakeholder. If the last few holdout houses, including the Carters, sold before the city rezoning vote in the spring, she stood to collect enough money to never worry again. Earl had already told her no. Politely, clearly, no. Sandra picked up her phone. 911, what's your emergency? Her voice went soft and worried, like she had practiced it. "I'm calling about 2 people outside a house on my street. I don't recognize them. They look like they're going through the property. I think something is very wrong." 10 minutes later, Officer Derek Moss stepped out of a patrol car. He had his sunglasses on and his hand already resting near his belt before he had said a single word to anyone. He looked at Earl and Ruth the way some people look at a problem they've already decided they don't have patience for. "Got a report of suspicious activity," Moss said. "You 2 live here." 38 years, Ruth said, standing up straight. "I'm going to need ID." Earl blinked. "ID? For gardening in my own yard." "That's what I said." Earl kept his voice calm, the careful, practiced calm of a black man in America who had learned young that pride in the wrong moment could cost everything. He explained that his wallet was just inside the door. He raised both hands, palms open, and took one single step toward his own porch. "Stop right there." Moss was already moving. His fingers closed around Earl's arm before the old man could even turn around, and Earl cried out a short, sharp sound that cut through the quiet morning like glass breaking. Ruth rushed forward without thinking. Moss shoved her back with his free hand. She hit the porch railing hard, and from inside the house, from behind the front door that was about to fly open, a heavy, deliberate set of footsteps began to move. The door didn't just open. It exploded, and the woman who filled that doorway made Officer Derek Moss take one involuntary step backward without even realizing he'd done it. Dominique Carter, dumb, to everyone who loved her, was not a small woman. She was broad across the shoulders, thick through the arms, and she moved across that porch with a kind of controlled, deliberate speed that doesn't come from anger. It comes from training. The kind of training that happens in freezing water at 3 a.m. while instructors scream in your face and most people quit before sunrise. Them didn't quit things. "That is my father," she said, her voice so low and even it somehow cut through everything. "Take your hands off him. Now!" Moss spun toward her, his hand dropping to the taser on his hip. "Get back! I will drop you where you stand. I swear to." "You don't want to do that." She kept walking, not running, not charging, walking, steady and unhurried, the way you move when fear's been trained clean out of you. She stopped 3 feet from Moss and placed herself like a wall between him and her parents. Her hands were open at her sides, visible, unthreatening, every move deliberate. Moss's fingers were white-knuckled on the taser. Sweat beaded at his temple. "My name," Dom said slowly, "is Petty Officer Dominique Carter, United States Navy, SEAL teammate." She lifted the edge of her shirt with 2 fingers, revealing the military ID clipped at her waist. "That man whose arm you're bruising is my father. This is my parents' home." The street went absolutely silent. Moss blinked behind his sunglasses. The second officer, younger, freckled, name tag reading reads, had been hanging near the patrol car watching the whole disaster unfold. Now he stepped forward, his eyes catching something on Dom's forearm. A tattoo, faded slightly with time. The unmistakable shape of a Navy SEAL trident inked into dark skin. Campbell Reeves started. "Moss," Dom corrected quietly, without looking away. "Moss!" Reeves stepped between them, one hand raised toward his partner, his voice dropping urgent and low. "Stand down. Right now. Look at her arm." Something cracked behind Moss's sunglasses. The absolute certainty that had made him grab a 73-year-old man, without a second thought, began to crack and crumble in real time. His hand slowly came off the taser. What followed was not an apology. It was the sound a humiliated man makes when he wants a moment to be over. Moss muttered something about a misunderstanding, wouldn't meet Earl's eyes, and retreated to his cruiser while the neighbors on their porches watched every second of it. The cruiser left tire marks in the gravel as it pulled away. But if the Carters thought it was over, they were wrong. Quick reminder, if you haven't subscribed yet, please do it now. We are so close to 1,000 subscribers, and your support means everything. Hit subscribe. It's completely free, and trust me, you do not want to miss how this story ends. That night, Officer Derek Moss sat alone in the precinct under humming fluorescent lights and typed a lie so smooth it almost sounded like the truth. He wrote that Earl had been evasive and reaching for something near the doorway. He wrote that Dom had charged at him aggressively, that he had genuinely feared for his life, that his taser had been drawn purely in self-defense against someone who refused every command. He added one final note in the body cam section. Equipment malfunction. No footage available. He hit submit before his conscience could catch up. Down the hall, Chief Harold Briggs, Moss's uncle, the man who had quietly made his nephew's problems disappear more times than he could count, read both documents side by side the next morning. Earl's formal complaint. Moss's fabricated report. He slid Earl's complaint into a desk drawer, picked up his phone, and called the district attorney's office. "I need a warrant pushed through," Briggs said. "Assault on an officer. Resisting arrest. The suspect's name is Dominique Carter." By early afternoon, the warrant was signed. Dom was kneeling in her parents' garden, the same garden where it had all started, helping her father restake tomato plants knocked loose during yesterday's chaos when the patrol cars turned slowly onto the street. She felt it before she saw it, that shift in the air that her body had been trained to recognize. She rose slowly, brushed the dirt from her knees. Dominique Carter. An officer walked up the path with a folded warrant. "You're under arrest. Assault on a police officer. Resisting arrest." "That's a lie." Earl scrambled to his feet, his bruised arm forgotten entirely. Ruth burst through the front door, her hand flying to her mouth. Dom didn't resist. She had learned long ago that resisting only hands cruel men exactly what they want. She toned, placed her hands behind her back without being asked, and stood perfectly still as a cold metal clicked shut around her wrists. Moss leaned against his cruiser across the street, arms folded, smiling. Earl watched his daughter being walked to a patrol car in handcuffs in the yard he had mowed and watered and loved for 38 years, and felt a sharp, crushing pain bloom suddenly behind his ribs. He pressed his hand to his chest, and quietly, so that nobody would worry, he sat down in the garden dirt and tried to breathe. Inside the house, Ruth was already dialing a number a neighbor had pressed into her hand weeks ago. a civil rights attorney named Camille Osei, and across town, a journalist named Nadia Parks had already seen the first grainy cell phone clip spreading online, and had started digging. Neither woman knew yet just how deep the rut went, but they were about to find out. By the next morning, the internet had already made up its mind. An anonymous account had posted 8 seconds of video. Just 8. Carefully cut, deliberately cropped. Dom crossing the lawn fast, her large frame moving with purpose, Moss stumbling backward with his hand on his taser. No context before it. No footage of Earl's arm being twisted. No sign of Ruth being shoved into a porch railing. Just a big woman moving toward an officer. The caption read, "Footage shows her lunging first. Judge for yourself." It spread like wildfire in dry season. By noon, strangers who had never set foot on that street were calling Dom dangerous. A threat, a liar. News channels that had run sympathetic headlines days earlier were quietly hedging their words, adding phrases like conflicting account and questions remain. Dom sat in her parents' living room, scrolling through the wreckage on her phone, her jaw tight enough to ache. Her mother moved silently around the kitchen, pretending to cook but not actually eating anything. Her father sat in his recliner, the bruises on his arm now deep purple beneath his sleeve, his face carrying the particular exhaustion of a man who has fought the same fight his entire life and is running out of strength to keep swinging. Then Dom's phone rang. Her commanding officer's office. Her security clearance had been formally suspended pending the outcome of the case. Everything she had worked for, every freezing pre-dawn training session, every deployment, every sacrifice, now hanging by a thread held by men who knew nothing about her except a fabricated police report and 8 stolen seconds of film. She set the phone down, looked at her parents, and said nothing, because some weights are too heavy to hand to the people you love. But while Dom was sitting in silence, 2 women were anything but quiet. Attorney Camille Osei had spent 4 days knocking on every door along the street, asking the same question with the same patient determination. Do you have a security camera? Anything facing the street? Most answers were apologetic shrugs. Then she knocked on the last house at the end of the block, an elderly man named Ace, who kept an old camera mounted above his garage more out of habit than anything else. "I think it's still recording," Ace said, scratching his head. "Never really checked it." The footage was grainy. It was slightly distant, but it captured everything, start to finish, time-stamped perfectly from the morning of the very first confrontation. Moss's aggression from the first second he stepped out of his car, his hand gripping Earl's arm, Ruth shoved against the railing, and Dom, big, calm, deliberate Dom, walking across that lawn with her hands wide open and not a single threatening move in her entire body. The truth, unedited, undeniable. Meanwhile, journalist Nadia Parks had been pulling threads of her own. Property records, HOA meeting minutes, financial disclosures, and buried inside a development company called Meridian Group stakeholder list, Sandra Holt's name. Sandra stood to collect a 6-figure payout if every house on that street sold before the spring rezoning vote. The Carters were one of the last holdouts. Earl had told her no, clearly and kindly, just months before that 911 call. Sandra hadn't called out of fear. She had called out of greed. Nadia also pulled Officer Moss's full personnel file. 3 prior complaints. Excessive force. Dismissed, dismissed, dismissed. Every single one closed under the signature of Chief Harold Briggs. And buried in an old community newsletter, a single line announcing Moss's graduation from the police academy, congratulating the nephew of then Sergeant Harold Briggs. Family protecting family. A badge covering a badge. Nadia called Camille. Camille called the city council. And this time, nobody let it happen behind closed doors. Before we get to the moment everything changed, if this story has moved you, if you feel that fire in your chest right now, please subscribe. We are fighting to reach 1,000 subscribers, and every single one of you is part of that. Hit subscribe right now. Leave a comment below telling us where you're watching from. And share this video, because stories like this one deserve to be heard by everyone. The council chamber was packed beyond breathing room the morning of the public hearing. Earl sat in the front row in a wheelchair, still recovering. Tessa's, Ruth's, hand resting on his shoulder like an anchor. Dom sat beside them in her dress uniform, spine perfectly straight. Moss sat 3 rows back, arms crossed, avoiding every set of eyes in the room. Chief Briggs sat near the front, his face carefully composed, though his hands wouldn't stop moving against his thighs. Camille rose first. "What the public was shown," she said, her voice filling the silent chamber, "was 8 seconds of a lie. Today, you will see the truth." Ace's footage played on the projector, every unedited, undeniable second of it. Gasps moved through the crowd like a wave. Dom commanding officer, Admiral Ray Stokes, who had driven 2 hours at morning just to be present, rose next and laid out the military's findings, a pattern of abuse stretching back years, complaints buried deliberately, a veteran assaulted under circumstances almost identical to what had happened to Earl, his report stamped unfounded within a week and never mentioned again. Then Nadia Park stepped forward and read the financial records connecting Sandra Holt to Meridian Group aloud, in front of every neighbor Sandra had ever smiled at across a fence. Sandra's face drained completely of color. The council chair's voice, when she finally spoke, carried the weight of someone who understood that what happened next would matter long after that room emptied. All charges against Dominique Carter are hereby dropped, effective immediately. Ruth broke, completely and beautifully broke, tears pouring freely down her face, her hand gripping Earl so tightly her knuckles went pale. Dom closed her eyes, just for a moment, just long enough to feel the weight finally lift. Furthermore, the chair continued, Officer Derek Moss is referred for criminal charges relating to filing a false report and civil rights violations. 2 officers moved toward Moss from the side exit. His face went white as chalk. The same cold metal click that had once closed around Dom's wrist now closed around his. He was walked out past the same community that had once watched silently while he humiliated an old man in his garden. Not one person looked away. Chief Harold Briggs rose stiffly before anyone could ask him to. "I'll submit my resignation," he said quietly, "effective today." Sandra Holt said nothing at all. She simply stared at her hands while the council recommended a full investigation into her involvement with Meridian Group and a restraining order filed by the Carter family. The community she had tried to manipulate now surrounded her in silence far louder than any words. The chair looked directly at Earl and Ruth before closing. "On behalf of this city, we offer a formal apology to the Carter family. The city will be covering the full remaining balance on your mortgage as part of an immediate settlement." Earl didn't speak. He simply lowered his head, pressed his fingers to his eyes, and let himself cry without shame for the first time in weeks. 1 week later, the same golden morning light that had fallen so peacefully over that front garden before everything changed, fell again. Earl walked slowly up his front path, leaning lightly on Dom's arm, and stopped when he saw the street full of neighbors. The teenage boy who had filmed in silence now held a handwritten sign. The woman from across the street stood with lemonade. Families from the far end of the block, people Earl barely knew by name, had come simply to stand on his lawn and say welcome home. Admiral Stokes crossed the grass in full uniform and stopped in front of Dom. "Your clearance has been fully reinstated," he said, extending his hand. "Effective immediately." Dom shook it. Couldn't find words equal to the moment. Didn't need them. As the sun began sinking slow and warm behind the rooftops that evening, Dom stood alone at the top of the porch steps, looking out over the street where it had all begun. Then she turned to face her parents standing in the doorway. Earl's chin lifted, Ruth's hand pressed to her heart, and raised a hand in a slow, formal salute. Down the street, the few remaining neighbors began to clap. The sound rose softly into the evening air, carrying across the lawn that had witnessed their darkest day. And now, finally, the brightest one. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something real, please give it a like. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe so you never miss the next one. We are so close to 1,000 subscribers, and you are the reason we keep going. 2 special stories are waiting for you on screen right now. Choose one and keep watching. Thank you for being here. It means more than you know.